Hello, everybody. Welcome again to another time of Muddy
Muddy
Puddles.
puddles. Let's get my hair in order.
I'm so glad I'm not a woman.
I love being a woman. I wouldn't change it for anything. This is loud.
So, good night, everybody. And again, we are having what we think is an important discussion. We're late. We're not normally
No.
late like this.
Well, apologies.
So,
Good night, Danielle. I see you on. Welcome.
I think I saw Francis too.
And good night, Francis. I see Gloria. Good night, Gloria,
Yes,
guys.
good night,
Welcome.
good night. As you come on, share as you come on. Like and share.
And we're so grateful for you guys who, go the journey with us every other Monday night now. We know that it is the bedtime of many people, but we thank you for holding on, and we hope it makes you, your life, your just your relationships even more rich.
Yes.
As we share, because we're doing that for ourselves, best as we can. Times are difficult, as we always say. Good night, Francis. Welcome. Nice to see you. But we want to help you in any way that we can, as God has allowed us and called us to do, and we're helping ourselves, like we said. So we thank you again for going the mile with us every other Monday night. I see Erlene. Good night, Erlene. Welcome.
Hope Canada is okay.
Yeah, should be warm enough by now. Should be warm by now. Fully warm. But we have another interesting topic, as Nevin said, tonight. And it's tied into the whole issue of stress and the stressors on marriages right now in relationships, and how we could try to really get through, right? Good night, Stacy. Welcome. Nice to see you. I hope you had a good birthday the other day. It was nice hearing from you. And Gretel. That's Gretel.
Gretel Henry.
Henry.
Glasses, man.
No, sorry. It was supposed to show us Gretel. Like, that's a Gretel. Good night, everybody. So, you want to tell them what we're talking about?
Share, like and share. Yeah, so our topic is really about criticism and the impact on marriage.
Yes.
What if you have a highly critical spouse or partner?
Or what if you are?
Or if you are highly critical.
Good night, Chanel. I see Sia. Hi, Sia. Yes. Good night.
So, and I guess we have to help you all help explain, what you'd consider very critical, overly critical, and that kind of thing.
But we have some things that will help us decide, what could be if you are overly critical and stuff like that. So we're going to want to hear from you guys as well.
Yes. I have a question right off the bat. How have you dealt with criticism from your spouse?
Well, let me just clear the air right now.
What are you clear for?
I think I'm better now, but I am a very...
You're improving a little.
On air. But I have been a bit critical in my marriage. I think generally I can be a very hard and fast, but with some things. And I think when it comes to my emotions, when it comes to my sense of self-preservation, I just tell people I don't play. Good night, Elva. Good night, Jacinta. Welcome, guys. So I have had to learn to deal with my critical nature, and God has allowed me to go through even some not so good things that have helped me to really, good night, Luther, welcome, help me deal with that. And so I'm not so critical now. That doesn't mean he's the angel, because he makes it sound as if I am the overly critical one. But I'm just clearing the air now. So you could ask me a question if you want. I'll be honest. I'm okay. Because God has allowed me to grow in that. And we're going to see where some of that criticism comes from. But one thing we want you to understand right away is that overly critical persons or spouses or partners in a marriage, in a relationship, etc., you want to get somewhere, will do more harm than good. It actually has the reverse effect. And so we want to really delve into that, what it is and how we could really address
and what it is not.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that any criticism means that it is out of place
Yeah.
or not necessary. So there is constructive criticism, but even the constructive one can be, it's the way you do it. It is the frequency with which you do it. Yes. So please tell us, how have you dealt with criticism?
Yes.
Have
In
you
your
been
marriage and
receptive
relationship.
to criticism? And how have you dealt with that in relationship?
Relationship.
Yeah.
Or have you ended up having World War VII in your marriage? Because some marriages have major wars ever so often. Tell us, because we want to know and help the persons out there how you deal with criticism. All right. So you want to get started, or you
Yes.
want to? I need to do my sharing as well, but I'll do that. So I mean, one of the things you want to start off with, and we're kind of tugging back and forth with this issue, is your stress. Right now, marriages are dealing with a lot of stress, and in general, but even now in this environment, this whole world, everywhere we go, we see statistics pointing towards marriages that are being dissolved or going through enormous amount of pressure because of the stress. And there's so many other factors that we often talk about in Muddy Puddles that lead to that stress. And so one of the things that we have seen as a key issue as well is this whole issue, as we said, of criticism. So when we think about our marriage and the role of criticism, I wanted to think about how that factor can form or shape or deform or misshape your marriage and relationship at this time, right?
And then the pandemic, heightens it a bit, in that you are in close proximity so much more now. Well, if you're in Antigua and other places in Barbados where the restrictions are not so deep, then I guess you are not experiencing the same thing. But all of us in the last year, we have experienced this. Your spouse or your loved one is right there with you, right through. If both of you work in the government in Trinidad and Tobago right now, you're home primarily, right? Some people still have to work if you're a nurse or what have you. But what if you're like that? And you see, when you're around somebody more, you might notice some things that you don't normally notice.
Or even pay attention to, because you may notice it, but it's like, I don't even have time to deal with that, you move on. So you get to provide that distance. But there's some comments coming in already. But no, we don't have that. So let's look into, we see comments coming in, we're looking at them, but let's look at what criticism is. So generally, criticism is what happens when somebody focuses on a person's flaws or shortcomings or quote unquote failures. And so in the marital or relationship context, it is where one partner, where one spouse is really zeroing on the flaws of the other person, the partner, in a judgmental way. And so what criticism is just an attack on the character of the person, the whole person. So let me put this in now.
Do you say that's criticism or that is more negative?
Yes. Yeah. Right. So that's
it can be
the
constructive.
Whole person. Well, we're going to look at that. So the complaint now. So we talk about complaint would equal constructive criticism. And so the difference between, because that's what happens so many times, people say, well, I'm not criticizing you, I'm just showing you something, or it's constructive. You can't take constructive criticism. You know how we are in relationships. But constructive criticism or a complaint is where you focus on a particular issue, as opposed to making it a whole person criticism or attack.
I think that's an important point.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's sometimes hard to separate the issue with the person. Yes. And either by the person who is doing it or the person who is receiving it.
Yes.
So if you're receiving the criticism, sometimes it may come over like it's an attack of you rather than an attack of the thing that you're doing.
Right.
If you understand what I mean.
And
the person who is also doing the criticizing may not understand or may not fully appreciate that what they're really trying to do is to deal with the issue and not the person. I like to say the person is the problem. The problem is not the person.
Right.
The person is, sorry.
The problem is the issue.
The problem is the problem is a problem.
Yes.
The person is not the problem.
Right.
Right? Turn on the volume.
Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
And so we have some comments already. So so let's help them frame this better. So one of the things that it will help you distinguish this is that, so let's give an example. So your husband, because I'm the wife, doesn't take out the garbage. And you say to the person, and they've done it like, 100 times. And you say to them when you come and meet this thing like this, you're so lazy. You never do that. You always leave it there to run over. And that now becomes a whole person attack.
Yeah.
As opposed to, you didn't take out the garbage, and I don't like when that happens because it's whatever it is. Right? Or another example, just want to get people to understand, because it's so, like Nevin said, it's so hard to differentiate sometimes. The line is so thin. Another example would be where in a sexual relationship, the person will say, well, I'm not in the mood. And the person says, oh, you are not interested in me, or you're just, you're just whatever.
Yeah, there's a broad
brush. Right. As opposed to saying, it seems as if at certain times this is the issue. Right? So, go ahead.
And we was going to bring this up.
Yes,
I was going to bring this up later. Let's deal with that later.
Okay.
So the power that the criticism can have and the impact it can have. A little later on, we'll deal with that.
Yes.
But are you following what we're saying, everybody?
Yes. Give us a thumbs up or whatever.
Or give us a view on it.
Well, let's see.
The reality is that the criticism, so there are a couple of things there, Billy, maybe we can take note of it.
Right.
It is the frequency that can become an issue.
Right.
It is the personal nature of it that can become a significant issue.
Yes.
I think those are the main ones. Maybe the ferocity, maybe the
intensity,
the intensity.
On the tone.
I tell you don't put the thing there. How much time I tell you don't put the thing there?
And you just.
It's different from, honey, remember I told you this is something that I really don't like. Can you please not do it? Or the frequency. So I tell you in the morning, I tell you in the afternoon.
So it comes nagging on it.
And if you're home, locked down, it probably be 5 times more that you say.
But I'm just going to be Desmond's advocate, because I'm thinking by the time I say the 5th time you do it, but let's just move on. So here's what. When a spouse is being critical, it is expressed in blaming the other person for their mistake. So that's why we're looking at differentiating it. Criticism is about blaming, right? And it is about trying to fix the other person, correcting them and expressing overall disapproval of the person. So let me go to that again. It's about blaming. You can do the quote there. It's about blaming the other person for their mistakes.
They're talking about critical spouses.
Right. About attempting to fix them or just correct them, and overall expressing of overall disapproval. So here's what Gary Chapman says. You want to use that quote? Or
yes. So people tend to criticize their spouse most loudly in the area where they themselves have the deepest emotional need. Very interesting. Very.
And I love that, because I was talking with a former colleague of mine. Good night, Yvonne. Welcome. And I was listening to his podcast. He's in Texas now. He was listening to his podcast. He was talking about love and relationship. And I remember I went back and asked him about something he said. And he was saying the things that irritate us the most in our spouse, point to the things that we need healing in. He was talking about healing and trauma in relationships and persons. And that's what Gary Chapman is saying. And we know it's often true. The things that we often criticize our spouse about are often the things that we have the greatest insecurity or issues with. So sometimes it is not so much, and we'll come to see that, it's not so much the person that is the issue, but it is our unresolved or raw issues that force us, because we're not dealing with it unresolved, force us to become critical of our spouse and not just attack it, not just addressing an issue, but attacking the person. Right? So you want to read the comments that we have?
Yeah, so Rodney says sometimes she's telling me about.
I think he said something earlier before. I had some problems with it.
Oh, okay. I missed that.
Yes, he said I had some problems with
Okay.
it because sometimes they would say the right thing in the wrong way, and that's a problem.
The right thing in the wrong way.
The right thing in the wrong way. So
Yeah,
that's to talk
you're
about
correct.
tone, right? And so go ahead.
So yeah, so there's a right way to say things or a better way. Yeah. Often it's really an issue of tone. And remember, we have spoken about communication,
Yeah.
the type of words,
timing.
the timing, those three things: the tone, the timing, and the type of words.
type, yeah.
And so sometimes the type of words, sometimes it's not even what they're saying; it's the way they're saying it, and it is the oomph behind of it. Yes. So when if I say, for example, and I love when Billy does that, when she does it with a smile or does it in a nice tone, I'm more receptive to it. If you want to get me less receptive, is come with the wrong.
The antagonism.
Right. And I think the same thing with it. If I came to her with something and I came in the wrong way, I don't think she'd be as receptive.
No, I just ignore you.
Or
answer.
Well, that's not being receptive. So,
All right.
so he's right. Yeah. So,
Yes.
and then he says it, and sometimes she's telling me about one thing I do, but she doesn't see the 5 things she does, and it makes her hard to take constructive criticism.
Okay,
very
so
interesting.
we're never going to come to that because that is one of the issues, and I don't know if it's a man thing, but
I
they
think it might be a
often
man
say,
thing.
"Oh, well, I did this. I didn't ask you about the 5 things you did. I'm glad you did the 5 things. I'm talking about the one that you didn't do."
Right.
That's what I'm
But
doing
you see,
with now.
and this is where I think I have to bring my view and my expertise in this. Men, I don't know if that's how God made us. There's something about affirmation that men.
I can't affirm
normally-
wrong.
No, not wrong. You don't have to affirm the wrong. But what he's saying is that you are identifying one thing, but you are ignoring the 5 of the other things. And I think that's what he's saying. Affirm the good things, yes, while also work on the not so good things. That's the
Guys,
thing
we want to hear from you tonight because we're gonna struggle here tonight if you don't help us. But here's what. So let me go over the quote that Gary Chapman made. People tend to criticize their spouse most loudly in the area where they themselves have the deepest emotional need. And remember this, criticism is not a complaint. You want to make sure you get that. So when you identify an issue, it is not necessarily have to be a criticism, but we don't want to do a whole person attack. And I see Chanel saying there
I think it's an issue of context.
of context.
Yeah, context
right?
is important.
That plays a role as well. So let's look at this now. So how do you know, before we get into that, let's look at what causes somebody to become overly critical. And I want you guys to give us some feedback.
Right.
What is it? Go ahead.
Before you do that, in addition to that, those who had previous relationships and you had the criticism coming up, some people don't like to share. We don't mind if you share. Tell us, how did you take those criticism? Not even, you don't have to talk about now. You might be in a marriage now, a relationship now. Talk about how has that affected you?
Yes.
How did that affect you in the past?
Yes.
The criticism. I want to hear the men too. I know there's some men.
And
who
what was
watch
it like being in a relationship where there was heavy criticism, just chronic criticism? All right. So one of the things that causes, we're looking at what causes persons to be overly critical. And here's the thing is that although the criticism we're talking about in marriage right now, many times it will spill over into other areas of your life, right? In your friendships, in your relationship, those sort of things. Okay. So one of the things that leads a person to become overly critical is a need to have control, a feeling that they don't have control. So it is said critical people are also control freaks or high maintenance people. So they are compelled to critique every little thing you do because it seems that they believe that their spiritual gift is to point out what is wrong with you.
spiritual
That's a spiritual gift. That is like, that's the 5 gifts of the Spirit. That's the next gift of the Spirit. To point out what is wrong with you. right? But what it really is that it is their desire or their feeling that they don't have control in these particular areas. So for instance, in the garbage experience, and we take out the garbage, we say, why don't I have control over, and I used to deal with that, why don't I have control all over the state of my house? I don't like when I feel like I'm losing that. It's like, well, you're not doing it, you never, and that became an issue when I really had to come to the place where I realized, okay, well, I can give myself peace of mind while everything else becomes chaotic. And that became something I had to learn over time. All right? So oftentimes it is an issue of feeling that you're not having control. All right? Another thing is that criticism is learned behavior. We're going to come to the comments again. It's learned behavior. So listen to this. If we always try to bring in this in our discussions when it's applicable, our families of origin. If you came from a family where criticism was the general way of operating, you will have learned that and become very incontinent in how you deal with things. So,
or you may have become critical. That's how you know how to communicate.
Yeah.
And so you might take that over, and then you get married to somebody where it's kumbaya all the time, where, well, maybe people deal with their issues better. And so here you have somebody who has gone through significant criticism. That's how they communicate, especially when they don't know how to do it well.
Yeah.
And then you come with somebody who they're not used to this kind of thing.
Yeah.
That can really start to cause an issue. Stephen has a comment here. He says, I agree, affirm the things that were completed before you jump on the one thing that it didn't. I think it's a man thing.
I need to hear the women talk, please. Women, you're not going to leave me out
this. You have to hear the men too.
Yeah, I want to hear the men, but I'm saying I feel like I'm just being, ambushed here.
Yeah.
Because
Why?
if the issue is the issue, why? So we have a situation where you didn't take out the garbage.
Right.
I must go and talk about how you're bringing all the money. So this has to be my preamble. Sonny, I'm so happy that you work hard and you bring home the money for us. I'm so happy that you wash the dishes. But for goodness sake, take out the garbage.
No, I think the important thing is,
ladies, I need to hear
right.
you.
No, I think the important thing is the approach. So sometimes when you're being criticized for the one thing, I'm just saying how it can come over. Sometimes when you deal with somebody's addressing the one thing, sometimes the impression you get that's not what you're saying, but the impression that you might get, because we have had these discussions, the impression that you might get is you're making noise about this one thing, but for the day I did all of these things and this one. That's the point that I think that sometimes I think this might be a little man thing too, but everything is not the same with every gender. I think that's what. So Shanna said, point, what is done well is good, but usually what that does is deflect from the issue at hand.
Thank you.
See, another woman there. Men talk up for me there, please. Persons naturally like praise, so to hear a flaw or yes, you're right. It's not easy to take criticism.
Good
yes,
night,
it's something you have to get used to. I'll share you quickly. When I went to seminary at UTC in Jamaica, when you're doing preaching, homiletics, they call it, introduction to homiletics, and never forget, everybody had to go and do something, some kind of thing, analysis we had to do, and then we had to do preaching too. And when you finish, you had to sit down in a circle, and every single person slam the sermon left, right, then tell you about the comma, then tell you your hand up by you don't even know hand by your face, they tell you this, they tell you that, they tell you something, they even say if he dies or not. But all they're doing is criticize. Now, my first session there, I had to go home and lie down a little bit. By the way, I confess it, I hope they're not listening, and my colleagues, after they're done with me never forget it. I'm a pastor, yes. But I never forgot that, especially if they were tough. If there are people who were very nice, they say, this was the... I didn't remember that. But you see, if you lick my sermon from head to toe, you see when faith has come, all when you don't see nothing, they come with it.
So you see, and no, and what he said, we're laughing because it's funny.
God forgive me.
But it shows, no, it really shows the damage. We're going to come to that. The damage that constant criticism can cause in a marriage.
But,
and so
by the way,
you're
and that
opening
was
up.
necessary. So criticism is good too. That
Right.
really helped me.
Right.
You know, that really helped me. First, you know, it kept me on my P's and Q's, and you had to prepare and you had to pay attention. You know,
Right.
sometimes, and we have been married for, how long now? 9 years. And, you know, there are things that Billy would have pointed out to me. And when she pointed out to me, it caused me to pay, sometimes it don't seem so, but I pay attention to it a little bit more. You know?
The patience a whole lot.
Yes, but no, that's the
All right,
that's
I'm
the
sorry.
impact.
I appreciate the little.
That's the impact that the criticism can have. So anytime
Constructive criticism.
constructive criticism, and so every time I came before a class, I came as prepared as I possibly could.
And so I think we can have that look compared to like stress, where stress can be good. But then when you have distress or chronic stress, then it becomes negative.
Right.
Same thing in a relationship.
Hear what
Right?
Rodney
Go ahead.
says. He says,
Yes, go,
if
go
you say,
on.
babe, you work so hard and thanks for changing the oil in my car.
I feel you, man,
Wait.
unrealistic now.
Trust me, he'll take out the garbage without you having to ask. Ah.
But it's a good thing I have two hands. I will take it out myself. No,
Hey, but I'm being serious now, and I think Billy knows this work. Let me tell you, you see, when you affirm it, this affirmation for everybody, a woman needs that.
and I
too.
was going to say, because
And
women
a
need to
man,
know
a
that
man
we are
needs
loved
that.
too. Yeah.
Ah, yes, that affirmation is important, is necessary. Be careful. I say this. Nothing is wrong with you identifying something that is important to you. I think you should be open to it. A man or woman who does not want to hear what the other spouse, what matters to the other, then you're in a bad place.
Yeah.
But I'll say this to you. There is something about filling up that bucket with affirming words.
Yeah.
You see, when you fill that up, fill it up, fill it up, fill it up. Even when you come with a zinger
Yeah.
or come with something hard, it because you have filled up the bucket so much.
Yeah.
So this is my tip to you tonight. Be careful what you're putting in that bucket.
Yes. Yes.
Be careful what you're pushing in that bucket. If that bucket is filled with more criticism
Yeah.
than affirmation, then there's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
For either spouse, eh?
Yes. That's
So
true.
fill it up with love, fill it up with appreciation, fill it up with affirmations, so that even when something tough comes up,
Yeah.
you have filled the bucket so much. When you drop the criticism in there,
Yes.
you won't even see it.
Yeah.
Yes? Or it won't have the same impact. Yeah?
So we were looking at why people are being so critical. Another thing is that they're critical of themselves. And that also can come from the way they were brought up. So somebody who is really harsh on themselves, very critical of themselves, unable to see their own goodness and forgive themselves, they tend to be critical with their spouse also, because that is the frame of reference. The Bible talks about loving yourself, loving others as you love yourself. What you give to others is what you have given to yourself. It's very difficult. People can say, I love you, but if you don't love yourself, how can you love that other person? So persons who are generally very critical of themselves would also be persons who tend to be critical.
Yeah, that's the other thing that you have to consider. I just want to say good night to Pastor Lerman from San Andres Island.
Where is
I
that?
met him in Panama. That's
welcome,
Rogelio's former
welcome,
pastor. So
welcome.
good to have you.
Yes.
Listen, Nigel says, make a man feels like a Superman, and he will
I need
seek
a moment to talk,
to
yeah,
move
'cause
mountains for the lady. I agree with that.
Man, over. You see, and I wanted to be.
No, wait. Let me
Okay,
balance
I'm
it.
sorry.
Chanel says there's a time and place for affirmation to love and encourage, and a time for accountability to do what is required. I agree, but don't miss my point. And I want you to do an inventory. Those who are in relationships with no marriage, if you can check what you say on a day to your spouse, just watch and see what that reveals. Is it filled with more? Why you didn't do this? What happened to you? What happened to you? Or
Praise.
I love you, honey. How are you doing? I appreciate what you're doing. What have you? Just check that, because if daily the diet that is being fed is that of negative criticism, then that's going to be the problem. That's the point. I'm one who believes in accountability. It's not always easy to take it. It is not always to hear that you're not doing this good or not. And most people don't bother with them. Nobody like to hear that they're not doing some things particularly well. Right? That's a natural thing in all of us. All of us almost have defenses relating to that. But I agree with you, accountability is necessary. There might be a time and place for some things, but even when there is a time for accountability, there is a way that you do it, that it does not result in
a breakdown.
A terrible breakdown. You know?
So let's quick, because the time is going, but be somebody who is self-protective. So a person becomes very critical when they fear that they're going to be hurt. So what they do is they create an armor of criticism, right? So, and also that tends to come from what they've gone through in their lives, especially in childhood. So if they were often taken advantage of,
or previous marriage, or previous relationship,
that's a big one. That's a big one. If you came from a marriage before where you had that and you're now in a different marriage, you almost kind of have these senses. It's kind of like trauma too. You have this imprint on your brain and your spirit that says, okay, when they come with this particular look, this particular tone, it's going to be something I don't like. So let me put up my own shield and let me attack first. So I become offensive as opposed to waiting to be on the defensive. So people who have issues with trust, and you're going to see how it affects it the same way, often become very critical, right? And go ahead.
I want to deal with the impact that it can have.
Right. Well, we're going to get to that, but go ahead.
Right. So on this website, Simply Together, Nick says that constant criticism, notice I said constant. Constant criticism is highly demotivating. Highly demotivating. And they say, I know it might seem counterintuitive. Most people tend to believe that being hard on others is a good thing. That a person needs tough love in order to stay motivated and strive towards their goals. In reality, this kind of attitude mostly backfires, especially when it comes to romantic relationships. It may work with other things, but it may not work with this thing. Yes? That's one thing. Billy will deal with something else, and then let's go to the effects and then deal with how is it that you must then approach this.
Right. So you started there. One effect is that it backfires. It has a reverse effect.
What's the other effect?
The other thing is that it lowers the self-esteem.
Right. That demotivational thing. Yeah.
And so when we talk about the lowering the self-esteem and the demotivation, it's really because it's a whole person attack. You're not saying, well, when you do that, it shows so and so. You're saying you are lazy, you're I don't know, you're insensitive or whatever we say. It makes the person question their own sense of personhood, their own sense of value, and their own sense of intentions. Because sometimes you'll be thinking, but that's not really what I want to be, or that's not really who I am. But this person that you trust is saying this to you, and it makes you begin to question yourself or second guess yourself. And so that definitely hits at the self-esteem. And let me tell you, if in a marriage the person's self-esteems are being eroded, it's going to affect negatively the morale of the marriage, the esteem of the marriage.
And even with the sexual experience, so you have to be very careful. Because sex is so rooted in the mind and in your feelings and so forth. Well, we have seen how some people in the world treat with this. How they may be critical of the man. What happened? You can't do nothing.
It happens in the church.
In the church too. What happened? You can't do nothing. What happened?
You're not a man.
You're not a man. You can't perform. What happened? And that's one of the worst things you can do. To even the looks of a woman, you know, say, well, you look so, you're so fat and so ugly, and so that will have an effect on the sexual experience. Because if the person doesn't feel desired, if that person doesn't feel encouraged, you know, so be careful what you say in that context, because it can have and sometimes the man may not even be dealing with erectile dysfunction. The man may be, the root of the problem may not be a physical one. The root of the problem may be a mental and emotional one. Yes? Because if you're slamming that person's ability to perform, trust me, you're just not pulling away from that ability as it is, and eventually it's going to get to their head, and what gets to your head will eventually affect your whole
your
body.
interaction.
Yeah.
So,
Jackie says quickly,
okay.
it goes both ways. Treat and speak to me nicely, and we'll have a wonderful relationship. I
That's
believe
it.
so.
Yes.
Kind words, soft words turn away anger.
Yeah.
You know, it really matters. Nigel said, it is advised by counselors to make sure words of affirmation and encouragement outnumber the criticism.
So it's normally a 5-to-1, I think. So
Yeah.
with every critical word you say, you have 5 positive and affirming words to back it
It
up.
really matters. It's a practical thing too.
It's like, think about it like a bank account.
Yeah.
Right? You're not
Or
going to
that
have more
bucket I
withdrawals,
told, yeah.
right, than you have deposits. Right?
Let's look at the other effect.
Another effect, erosion of trust. Now, this is a big one, because remember I said it also comes from a place of feeling threatened and often feeling that you can't trust. But criticism, chronic criticism in a marriage by a spouse could cause trust to be eroded in the relationship, because the person often feels that I cannot depend on you to give to affirm me. I cannot depend on you to give me balance. That's the word I'm looking for. Balance is a word we use, not balance. Anyway, the balanced feedback. Whenever something happens, I can't trust myself to come to you, because if I come to you, this is what I'm gonna get. And so they no longer feel safe, and it erodes trust, right? And it can go in other ways as well, but that's how it generally starts to go down, right?
So trust is eroded.
And then generally it violates the person. It's not fair for an individual to have to constantly hear criticisms or just flat out disapprovals, as opposed to, like we're saying, finding ways to interject positive or affirming words of the person and what they're doing in the marriage. And so generally it makes that person feel less of a person. And so let's put it together. If you don't feel like you can trust your spouse, if you feel less of a person, if which is linked to your self-esteem, if your self-esteem is being eroded, if you're feeling that you're not motivated to do anything in a marriage, then the impact on the marriage will be negative. And so criticism, again, we want to make sure we reinforce this. Criticism is not complaint. It's okay to point out an issue that is happening. Point out the issue. And that is why we often say with our communication, point it out with the I statements. I don't like that. Or I feel hurt. Or I feel disrespected. Those are the I statements. Not that you are this and you are that. The I statements allow you to take ownership of your emotions.
And then it expresses the
desire. So this is what I want at the end. All right? So you have to be able to separate criticism from a genuine complaint.
And let me tell you, generally, most people don't like harsh criticism. I'll tell you this is my view on it. You see, if somebody outside, somebody could even be somebody at your work, somebody in your church. It's tough when people criticize you. But I'm saying, as a pastor, it really doesn't come up to the level of what I could feel if it's a loved one. You see, when a loved one is overly critical, the significance of the relationship really matters. Yes? And so sometimes I face criticism in other places. It could be church, could be outside. If it really doesn't, I sleep well, because I know I have affirmation at home, to my children, to my spouse. And so it's when there's the significance of the relationship. So when a spouse is overly critical, even a parent, it can really have an impact. They say here also, criticism creates resentment in relationships. On top of getting you the opposite of desired effects, constant criticism will inevitably create some lasting damage to your relationship.
Anger.
Every time you criticize your partner about something, you might be discarding their efforts to make you happy. I know what you most likely thinking. What? My partner clearly doesn't care about making me happy. And so you might start to feel like that. But what if he or she does try, just that they're not doing it the way you need it?
And you see that statement there, I think that is where what we're just talking about, the I statements, become so powerful, because then you could say, this is not what I want. This is what I want. You're not doing what I want. This is what I want. And so rather than saying, you are not fulfilling me, you are not thinking, when they may be genuinely trying to make you happy, they're genuinely trying to love you the best they know how, you can say, you know what, I don't feel very loved in this particular situation. Can you love me this way?
Right.
Right?
So it gives you a chance to share how you feel.
And then it helps to dissipate the anger, because then when your needs are constantly not met, you're feeling constantly attacked. It's just like an animal. If you constantly corner an animal, they feel threatened and they're going to begin to get ready to pounce in defense, right? So I just want to read the quote, another quote I had here. If unaddressed, criticism in marriage damages the fabric of the relationship. Now, we've been saying it, just bringing it together in a quote. Unhealthy criticism undercuts the basic cornerstones of good relationships, which are safety, acceptance, approval. Regular criticism drains the vitality and spontaneity from a relationship. Let me read it again.
Nice.
Regular criticism drains the vitality and spontaneity from a relationship. So what criticism does is that it knocks at the safety, acceptance, and approval of the person, and of course, definitely the relationship. All right?
Right. So, another effect, we said... Go ahead.
No, we had these already. So
right, okay.
Okay, go ahead.
So what are the signs that you may be too critical? John Beatty suggests some things here. Your spouse says you're too critical or makes complaints about your negative comment. So if they're saying that, then that's not something you should ignore.
Right.
Yeah? That's not something you should ignore. Your spouse gets defensive or angry in response to your feedback. That's another sign. Your feedback includes phrases like you should, you did, you always, you never.
Yeah.
Right? Also, you often say, why didn't you? Which is often used as an accusation rather than to express genuine curiosity. And your comments focus on what's wrong with your spouse or their behavior.
And that's how you can know if you are being a very critical person. And then we have some questions you can ask about if you are being criticized. So for instance, I'm just trying to find it in my notes here because the notes is kind of right. So how do you know if you're being critically criticized often? If you have chronic criticism in your marriage and relationship, do you or your, I'm going to include both just to make it balanced. Do you or your partner insult each other regularly? That is one of the telltale signs. I'm going to come to the comments again just now. Do you or your partner call each other names often? So not only insulting by saying derogatory stuff, but you call them derogatory names. They're similar, but there's a slight difference. And if there's a difference in opinions, do you allow an argument to ensue just to say to your partner, you are wrong and I'm right? So I don't want to hear your way because your way doesn't really matter. All right? Or if your partner does something to upset you, do you get irritated to the point where all you do is bring up all the other things that they have done wrong? So if that is happening, then, and there are other things, but these are some of the main ones. This is demonstrating that you or your partner may be a little bit critical to the point where the Gottmans have said, because criticism is one of their first headless horsemen, that could destroy the marriage. And so understand that criticism can be like poison for your marriage. All right?
So what do you do then? As we look to wrap up, how do you counter this tendency to be critical? Well, just know this. Don't hesitate as it is to voice your complaints. Get your partner to hear you out. You might say, how do you do that? As we said, it's your approach that could really matter. One of the things that I know Billy has done and I have done, she would say, you know, I really need to talk to you about something. You know, tell your partner that this matters to you. I really need to talk to you about this. I need to hear from you, or what have you. We said this already, but it bears repetition. Choose your words more carefully and try to be more delicate towards them. Yes? Choose your words more carefully. Try to be more delicate. Yes? And also remember, you don't need to control your partner in order to get what you want. They are most likely willing to give it to you. they're most likely willing to give it to you.
Sorry.
So, those are just a few things. But if you want to add anything, I see some
Right.
things there.
Yeah, we have some more. And then I just look at some of the comments that they have. Sean, and we can go into what do you do? Speak each other's love language. This is
Yeah.
one that we have done. You control the phone because I can't control the computer and the phone. That's one of the things that we have seen and have been shown to affect positively a relationship that may be dealing with harsh criticism or disapproval along the way. All right, so we want to be able to learn each other's love language and communicate in that way. So when you are struggling with any of these issues, so we have a point here. Each of the issues can indicate some emotional intimacy issues that can result from or could feed into criticism. So if you are being self-critical, we mentioned this before, it makes it more likely that you will be critical of your partner and not willing to accept their differences. So we're now linking it, we haven't touched on it, we're now linking it to the intimacy. If you are self-critical, it's very likely that you're going to be critical of your partner, and that's going to affect the intimacy. We have some comments, can we look at that? Appreciative. Actually, one of the factors I didn't bring in, which I had as a note, is that if you are not a person who practices gratitude, it will be more easy for you to be critical. Now, the thing is, the men for the night have been really pointing towards this. Rather than saying what I didn't do, talk about what I do. You know, so you want to practice gratitude in your marriage. Be thankful.
Right.
Sweetheart, I'm
And we're not
grateful
saying,
that-
and not necessarily saying, while you're bringing up that issue, you have to mention all the others. What we're saying is remember to highlight
Yes, the good.
when those things, good things are done.
Right.
So that whenever there is need to bring up something that's important to the other,
Yes.
then you have filled up your basket or your
Yes.
bucket to the point where it can take that kind of accountability or disclosure as it is.
Right. So if you don't have an appreciative attitude or attitude of gratitude, it could affect your interaction, leading to more criticism, and that can eventually lead to issues with intimacy. And remember, intimacy is not just sex. We're talking about that bonding that has to take place, because criticism knocks at the ability to develop really deep intimacy.
Right.
All right? Go
Sean
ahead.
is saying something, Sean Easton. Thank you, Sean. If you confront your partner about an issue and the person always gets angry, then you never resolve the issue. Correct. So you never get to deal with the issue as it is. And then he says, if your partner never appreciates nothing that you do and always compares you to some other brother,
Well,
let me
that's
tell
a
you,
big issue there.
comparison. Maybe we should do a whole
Yeah.
thing on comparison.
And it's kind of hard sometimes. Go ahead. You were saying.
So if you're doing comparisons, you really need to stop. Yeah, there's no other way to put that. Don't compare your spouse to anybody.
Yeah.
And
Especially a former partner.
well, those are like bullets to
The heart.
the heart. Yeah. So just be careful. When I used to be with this and or you might even say when you used to be with him, you used to do this and do that and do that. Please, the comparisons.
What about if you compare them to your parents?
You're comparing the cooking.
Well, I don't know.
If you compare.
Because I remember.
No, let me tell you. So let me tell you an example. Suppose I said, honey, I find you don't cook the food nice like my mommy.
I would say, well, go buy your mother favorite food. I don't have time for
I
that.
think bad, but this is the point. So you compare.
The point is comparison.
You're comparing to the. Let me tell you, you're really putting yourself in a tough place. And so that's how criticism can be really tough.
Carol is saying yes, the parents. And you see, that you just said it. Criticism comes in subtle ways.
Yeah.
And so it can really knock at the marriage. It really knock at the relationship. The parent, see, listen, saying the parent issue is a real one.
Yes, and also in-laws who would throw the criticism,
Oh boy.
and the spouse not coming to the defense,
Yeah.
or that's like allowing the criticism You know, allowing
or being critical yourself, because
Right.
you're saying, yeah, man, it's true. I'm not saying anything
Right.
about it.
Right.
All right, let me just finish up this last point so we can. So, committed. Distrusting your judgment regarding relationships interferes with your ability to fully commit to the other person. So, if you don't trust the judgment of your spouse, we're recapping these things in a different way, and you begin to become overly critical, again, we're linking it to the intimacy, that can affect the intimacy in the marriage, in the relationship. You're trying to build a relationship based on trust and connection and cohesiveness, not criticism, because what happens is that when we criticize, we move away from each other as opposed to moving towards, right? And then accessibility. We talked about this already. Being self-protective suggests that we make ourselves accessible enough to allow others to become deeply involved with us. Critical persons, like I said, tend to have this shield, this barrier up. So what happens is that while they're being overcritical, many times they're doing everything they can do to hide their own flaws. Remember we said earlier, the thing that you're most critical about in your spouse is what you're most times struggling with yourself. All right? So like my colleague said, Greg, he said the thing that irritates you the most in your spouse is where you need healing in your own life. You know, and that's I had to, when he talked about it, I had to really check myself like, I think that's true. All right. The last one, courageous. Fearing space is a sign that we lack the courage to secure our individual identity while being a part of the couple. So in other words, you want to, you fear that independence in the marriage. There's some in the relationship of the marriage. There's some people who feel that if you try to have time for yourself, and that's something that can create a lot of criticism, you need time for yourself, that it means that you don't want us. So they call it fearing space. You're afraid of giving that space, that alone time to the person. And so that really knocks at the identity again and the autonomy of the person, because we are while we are a couple, we are still individual persons. Sorry. Never I have shared about that where in our life we just have times where he just goes his way and I just go my way, because I mean how much more I can see him for the day? I have to see him again tonight. So we take our time, and we're now teaching our children as well that, you know what, mommy needs some time, mommy needs a 5 minutes, or daddy needs some time alone, so go occupy yourself in a safe manner. We still have to listen, because they still have babies, but this is our time. And that is something that you have to foster. Sorry, my throat is going. So you don't have to be afraid of the space. At the end of the day, if you are overly critical in your relationship, critical of the way your spouse is moving, and so many things we addressed, if you do not practice gratitude, if you do not practice appreciation, if you're seeing all the flaws and trying to link the flaws, clock the flaws with the person and say, you are this, as opposed to when you do this, then it is very likely, as we said in the earlier, as one writer said earlier, to become very toxic and poisonous to the marriage. All right. And
then here's a danger.
Sorry.
Sometimes in your interactions at other places, like your workplace or what have you, those persons may not be as critical. In fact, they might tell you how great you are. I think sometimes even pastors could fall into this trap too. Yes, where marriages have gone badly. So if you're a spouse of a pastor, or if you're a spouse generally, just be careful, because you might hear more praise outside and come home and get more, what they call, jeers inside. That may create a dynamic where you feel more appreciated outside as compared to inside. This can happen with anybody. It doesn't have to be a pastor. Maybe at work you hear more praise, and when you come home you get more jeers. You have to be careful, because that creates a dynamic where it seems like home is more critical and the workplace is where. And in fact, that's why some people love work. That's why some people stay work longer. That's why this pandemic has put many in tough places, because you now have to be at home all the time. And so just be mindful of that. I believe in this, in the power of really affirming, and how filling that bucket, how filling that as it is, that reserve, that really, really matters. because we have to deal with tough issues. Nobody's perfect. I've never met a perfect spouse anywhere. So I know that there are going to be issues that will come up in the course of your marriage that will need some really tough things that you might have to deal with. Yes? But if you have filled the affirmation bucket, that appreciation bucket, that gratitude bucket enough, then even when you have to bring up tough issues, it can be managed.
And just to add, as we wrap up here, because we are now out of time, if you are a person who is very critical and you have come to realize that you've answered some of the questions we've asked tonight, or you've kind of seen it in yourself, it's important that you begin to do, as Nevin said, for yourself. Begin to affirm yourself and look into those issues that are causing you to bleed. Because what happens is that you bleed on your partner. So if you're seeing those issues in your own life and you find that you're most critical in those areas with your spouse, then turn away from criticizing your spouse and begin to examine yourself and move towards self-healing, self-soothing. And then, of course, in doing that, the affirming posture of your own self is very important, because one of the things is that you always need somebody to affirm you. Learn to affirm yourself, and then learn to forgive yourself for those areas where you find yourself being weak or you have your own flaws. If you are the critical person, this is for you. Allow yourself to heal in the areas where you're bleeding. Allow yourself to affirm yourself. Teach yourself to affirm and appreciate yourself. And allow, the last point I just made, I just think there, but allow yourself to become not just the critical person, but allow yourself to heal in the process. And of course, if you must, just the last thing, if you must, get help from somebody. Because if you really love your spouse and you really want your marriage to work, being critical all the time will only poke holes in it, and eventually it's not going to survive.
Right. So this is what I suggest to you. Try doing some more affirmations. Yes? That's part of what we tried with the kindness challenge. Part of the kindness challenge says, say something nice, something you appreciate about your spouse every single day. You may even want to take a note of it, did I say anything nice today about my spouse? Something affirming about them today. Something as simple as I love you, but something else, I appreciate what you did. I noticed this about Billy. She may not say it, but she loves when she gets feedback with her cooking. Was the food tasty? Was it nice? And what have you? And so I have to remind myself to just tell her, hey, the food was really nice.
Especially I have children who say, Mommy, this was awesome. My husband has to say it too.
Yes. Thank you so much for being with us again tonight. And we pray that you may put some of these things in practice. Yes, it really matters. And if you find yourself, if your spouse has said to you that you're critical, overly critical, maybe you need to just pause a little bit and see, they might be telling you some truth. Yes? And that's not an excuse for people who don't want to be held accountable, and for persons who don't want to grow. Yes, that's not an excuse. We must be willing to bring up issues that really matter to us. Yes, and listen to your spouse when they say this really matters to me. That's not an excuse for people who just don't want to hear anything that questions anything. So please be open, be honest, be appreciative, be grateful. Love up your spouse, tell them how much you appreciate what they do, but also be willing to hear from them when something is not quite what it should be. Yes?
And do that self-examination.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for the love and appreciation. We love you too. And we appreciate the time that you spend with us every week. God bless you. Sister is saying most women do love feedback.
Oh, yes.
I think so. Yes. And I wish I knew this all the time, but I wish I'd done it more very early. Although Billy will tell you I'm somebody who will tell her that, So, God bless, and please have a wonderful night. Thank you for joining us.